Many people reach a point where they grow tired of waiting for God's restoration. They feel as though the years are slipping by and the dreams they hold seem increasingly distant. If you are tired of waiting, it is important to first understand that restoration is not just about returning to a former state, but about being prepared for a greater future. Restoration is God's process of refining and transforming you. When God restores, He does not just bring back what was lost, He takes you to a new level. What you are waiting for might seem like it was once a part of your life, but the restoration God offers will be greater than what you have ever known. This is why it feels like such a long process. God is not simply fixing you old, He is making you new. Restoration is often misunderstood as merely returning to the state of being we once had before experiencing loss, trauma, or hardship. Many people think that when God promises restoration, it means simply getting back what was taken or lost, whether it be relationships, opportunities, or even material possessions. However, true restoration goes far beyond this narrow definition. God's restoration is a transformative process that not only restores what was lost, but also elevates us to a higher level of purpose, maturity, and capacity. It is a restoration that surpasses our previous understanding of what we thought we had before the loss, and it often involves a refining of our character and perspective. When God restores, He does not merely aim to bring us back to where we were. He is far more concerned with our growth and preparation for a greater future than with merely recreating the past. For example, in the Bible, when Job went through his suffering and loss, his restoration was not simply about regaining his wealth, health, and family. Job's restoration was about God refining his understanding of who He is and how He operates. Through his trials, Job's faith was deepened, his character was strengthened, and his relationship with God was taken to a new level. By the time God restored Job, he had gained a deeper knowledge of the divine purpose and plan, and his faith was unshakable. What God gave him after the trial was far greater than what he had before. This deeper understanding of restoration reveals that it is not a return to the former state, but a progression towards something greater. Just as an artist restores a painting, they do not simply recreate it to match its original form. Instead, they preserve its essence while enhancing its overall beauty. God's restoration works similarly. It enhances us, refines us, and prepares us for a higher calling. We are often restored not to the point we were at, but to a place of greater influence, greater responsibility, and greater capacity. This type of restoration takes time and involves a process of growth, healing, and preparation. True restoration also includes the restoration of purpose. Many people equate restoration with the return of material things or the resolution of external circumstances. While these things are certainly part of restoration, the core of restoration is the restoration of the divine purpose for your life. When God restores, He aligns you with His original design for you, allowing you to walk fully in the calling He has set for you. The years or moments that were lost or delayed are not wasted in God's economy. They are part of the process of refining you for a purpose that is greater than what you initially understood. God's restoration brings a sense of fulfillment that is not dependent on external circumstances, but on the alignment of your heart with His will. Restoration involves a process of spiritual growth that cannot be rushed. Often when we are in a period of waiting for restoration, we are tempted to want things to happen quickly or return to normal right away. However, God uses waiting as an essential part of His restorative work. Waiting is not just about passively enduring the absence of what we once had. It is an active time where God works on the inside of us. He works on our hearts, developing qualities like patience, trust, and humility, which are necessary for handling the weight of the blessings and responsibilities that come with restoration. If we rush through the waiting process or fight against it, we risk missing the lessons that are integral to the restoration process. It is in the waiting that our faith is purified, our character is tested, and our spiritual muscles are strengthened. True restoration requires a shift in perspective. We must move from viewing restoration as a return to what was to understanding it as an advancement to what could be. If we see restoration merely as regaining what we lost, we limit ourselves to the past and prevent God from bringing us into the fullness of His plan for our future. God's restoration is not just a return, it is a forward movement. We are being restored, not just for what we have lost, but for what God is preparing us to achieve. It is a greater purpose, a higher calling, and a deeper relationship with Him. This shift in understanding allows us to embrace the process of restoration, even when it seems long or difficult. In this way, true restoration is holistic. It is not limited to just the material or external things we have lost. It is a process that touches every aspect of our lives, our emotional, mental, spiritual, and relational well-being. God's restoration includes healing from past hurts, the rebuilding of relationships, the renewal of our minds, and the restoration of peace in our hearts. It is a comprehensive work that brings us back to a place of alignment with God's original purpose for our lives, but with the added depth and richness of having gone through the process of restoration. In essence, God's restoration is a process of making us whole again, but in a way that far exceeds the condition we were in before. It brings us to a place of greater strength, wisdom, and understanding. It aligns us more closely with God's purpose and equips us for the future He has prepared for us. This process requires patience, trust, and an open heart. When we understand that restoration is not just about getting back what was lost, but about stepping into something far greater, we can fully embrace the waiting process and the transformative work God is doing in our lives. God's timing often diverges significantly from our understanding of timing. As humans, we tend to measure time based on immediate needs, desires, and expectations. When we face challenges, loss, or uncertainty, we want things fixed immediately. We want our situation restored right away. We often equate divine intervention with quick resolution and expect God to act according to our schedule. However, God's timing is different. His view of time is eternal, and He operates according to His divine wisdom, which far exceeds our limited understanding. When we are waiting for restoration, it's crucial to recognize that what may feel like a delay in our lives is not a denial of God's will, but rather part of a divine process designed to bring us to a place of greater strength, character, and purpose. The challenge of understanding God's timing stems from the fact that we are finite beings who live within the constraints of time, while God is infinite and sees the beginning from the end. Our lives are bound by the constraints of hours, days, and seasons, but God exists outside of those boundaries. He sees the whole picture, the full scope of our lives, while we can only see the present moment. What we perceive as a delay in God's action is often His way of working out things we cannot yet see, whether it's preparing us, arranging circumstances, or ensuring that the timing is perfect for our restoration. It's important to understand that God's delays are not denials. A delay in the process does not mean God has forgotten us or that He is withholding His promises. In fact, waiting for God's restoration often involves periods where things seem to get worse before they get better. This can be frustrating, especially when we feel that we've been waiting for an answer for too long, but this is precisely where faith plays a critical role. Waiting is not passive, it is an active demonstration of trust in God's sovereignty. During these periods, God is refining our faith, teaching us perseverance, and helping us align more closely with His will. It is in the waiting that our relationship with God deepens and our understanding of His ways becomes clearer. The longer we wait, the more our faith should grow, not shrink. We must remind ourselves that God's plan for us is much greater than what we can see in our current situation. He knows what we need and when we need it, and His timing is always perfect. Part of what makes waiting so challenging is our inability to fully grasp the concept that God's purposes are far bigger than our immediate needs. We may feel like the timing is all wrong. Perhaps we have lost something, are in a season of pain, or are struggling to make ends meet. Yet, in the midst of waiting, God is preparing us for what we cannot yet comprehend. What may seem like a delay is actually a necessary process of transformation. God's restoration involves a deep, often hidden work, one that takes place in the spiritual realm and in our hearts. This is why it cannot happen on our timeline. God must first ensure that we are spiritually and emotionally prepared to receive what He is bringing into our lives. If we were to receive what we're asking for prematurely, we might not have the character or strength to handle the responsibility, or we might miss the deeper blessings that God wants to give us. God's timing involves a level of cooperation from us. While God is sovereign and in control, He also works in partnership with us. There are moments when God will wait for us to align with His will before He fully acts on our behalf. The waiting period can serve as a time for us to examine our hearts, adjust our attitudes, and make any necessary changes to our lives. In many cases, our restoration is delayed not because God is unwilling, but because we are not yet fully aligned with His purposes. Waiting can be an opportunity for us to grow in patience, humility, and trust. During these seasons, it's important to ask ourselves whether we are cooperating with God's timing, or whether we are resisting the process because of impatience or fear. If we are resisting, the waiting period may feel longer and our hearts might become weary. However, when we learn to surrender to God's timing, we can experience peace even in the midst of waiting, knowing that He is in control and will act when the time is right. God's timing also involves a strategic orchestration of events that we cannot fully comprehend. It's easy to think that things should happen according to our plan, but often God is working behind the scenes to set up the right circumstances. He's bringing the right people into our lives, opening doors that we cannot see, and orchestrating events in ways that we can't imagine. Just as a master conductor arranges every note and every movement in a symphony, God is orchestrating the events of our lives to work together for our good. His timing ensures that everything falls into place at the right moment. While we may not understand the process in the moment, we can trust that He is working everything out according to His will. When we embrace God's timing, we open ourselves up to a greater level of peace and contentment. Waiting becomes less of a burden when we trust in God's perfect timing. Instead of focusing on the frustration of the delay, we begin to focus on God's faithfulness and goodness. We can rest assured that He will not delay our restoration any longer than necessary. As we grow in trust, we develop a peace that surpasses understanding, knowing that God is at work even when we cannot see it. God's timing, although different from ours, is always best, and it always leads to the best outcome for our lives. True restoration involves more than the mere return of lost things. It is about the restoration of purpose. When we experience loss, we often focus on the tangible things, the material possessions, relationships, opportunities that have been taken from us. However, God's vision of restoration is more holistic and includes the revival of the deeper purposes and plans He has for our lives. Restoration is not just about getting back what was once ours. It is about rediscovering and realigning ourselves with the divine purpose we were always meant to fulfill. This process is integral to understanding the full scope of God's restorative power. Restoration of purpose is about returning to the core of who we are and understanding why we were created in the first place. Many people go through life without a clear understanding of their purpose. It's only through experiencing loss or hardship that some people are awakened to the need for greater meaning in their lives. In these moments, God does not simply bring back what was lost. He often reveals to us a deeper sense of purpose, one that is not bound to material things or temporary circumstances. This deeper purpose is what drives true restoration. When God restores, He does not just restore our possessions or external circumstances. He reestablishes His original plan for our lives, a plan that transcends temporary setbacks or challenges. Understanding this restoration of purpose requires us to let go of our limited perspectives and be open to God's broader vision. Often our concept of purpose is shaped by our own desires or the expectations placed on us by society, family, or even ourselves. However, God's purpose for us is always greater than we can imagine. It involves not only our individual well-being, but also the impact we have on others and the world around us. God's plan for restoration includes bringing us back into alignment with this greater purpose. It often involves shifting our focus from our personal struggles to a broader understanding of the role we play in the grand scheme of God's will. This shift in focus helps us see beyond our present pain and challenges and allows us to embrace the greater picture of God's plan for restoration. A key part of restoring purpose involves the discovery of our God-given gifts and talents. When we experience hardship or loss, it can be easy to feel defeated, as if we are not equipped to move forward or make a positive impact. However, part of God's restoration process is bringing us to a place where we can recognize and use the unique gifts He has given us. Our gifts are not just for our own benefit, they are meant to be used in service to others, and in doing so, we fulfill our greater purpose. When God restores, He opens our eyes to the potential within us, often in ways we didn't realize before. Through the restoration process, we learn how to better utilize these gifts to fulfill the calling on our lives. This restoration of purpose also involves healing from past hurts and wounds. Many people are held back from fulfilling their purpose due to the emotional and psychological scars left by past experiences. Whether it's the pain of betrayal, failure, or disappointment, these wounds can hinder us from moving forward and fully embracing God's plan for our lives. The restoration of purpose is intertwined with the healing of these wounds. God doesn't just heal us for the sake of comfort. He heals us so that we can move forward into the purpose He has for us. Without healing, we are often unable to fully embrace our calling or use our gifts in the way that God intends. Through restoration, God works to heal these wounds, not to erase our past, but to make us whole so that we can fulfill His greater plan. The restoration of purpose is not a static process, it is an ongoing journey. Our understanding of purpose deepens as we grow in faith, wisdom, and spiritual maturity. At different stages of life, our purpose may evolve as God leads us into new areas of influence, new responsibilities, and new challenges. True restoration is not just about returning to a previous state, it is about the continual unfolding of God's plan for our lives. As we experience restoration, our understanding of our purpose becomes clearer, and we are empowered to step into it with greater confidence and clarity. Another important aspect of restoration of purpose is that it connects us to a higher calling, one that is not based on worldly success or approval, but on the will of God. Our purpose is not defined by the standards of the world, but by God's design for our lives. This understanding frees us from the need to constantly prove ourselves or chase after temporary accomplishments. When our purpose is rooted in God's will, we can find peace and satisfaction, knowing that we are fulfilling the calling He has placed on our lives. We no longer have to measure our success by worldly standards, but can rest in the knowledge that we are fulfilling the ultimate purpose of our existence. Through the restoration of purpose, God brings us into a deeper connection with Him. When we understand our purpose, we align ourselves with God's plan. And this alignment draws us closer to Him. We recognize that our purpose is not just about what we do, but about who we are becoming in the process. Our relationship with God becomes the foundation for fulfilling our purpose. And as we grow in that relationship, we become more equipped to fulfill the calling He has given us. The restoration of purpose, therefore, is not just about external circumstances, but about an internal transformation that leads us to live in accordance with God's will and bring glory to His name. The restoration of purpose is the key to experiencing lasting fulfillment. When we are living in alignment with God's purpose for our lives, we experience a sense of peace, joy, and fulfillment that cannot be found in material possessions, external success, or fleeting achievements. Purpose gives meaning to everything we do. And it is through the restoration of purpose that we find our true identity and calling. In this way, God's restoration is far greater than merely returning what was lost. It is about bringing us into the fullness of who we were always meant to be. The role of faith during the process of restoration is paramount. Faith is the key that unlocks the power of God's restorative work in our lives. Without faith, the journey of restoration becomes arduous, discouraging, and even impossible to comprehend. Many times when people are waiting for God to restore what was lost, they struggle to hold on to hope because the circumstances seem so dire. It's in these moments that faith must rise, transcending the visible and the tangible, and anchoring us to the promises of God. Faith is not just a passive belief, it is an active trust in the unseen and unwavering conviction that God will fulfill His word, even when we cannot see the immediate results. Faith in the restoration process requires us to acknowledge that God's ways are higher than our own, and His understanding far surpasses our limited human perspective. It is easy to become disheartened when things are not happening according to our timeline or when restoration seems delayed. However, true faith does not waver in the face of uncertainty or delay. Faith believes that God is working even when we cannot see it. This type of faith holds firm to the conviction that God is always at work behind the scenes, orchestrating events and positioning circumstances for our benefit. Faith allows us to trust that God is doing a deeper work within us, preparing us for the restoration He is bringing into our lives. Faith in the restoration process requires surrender. To trust in God's restoration, we must be willing to release our need for control. Often we try to manipulate circumstances or force things to happen according to our own desires. However, God's restoration is not about us trying to force a result, but rather about us surrendering to His perfect will. This surrender requires humility, as it involves trusting that God knows what is best, even when it doesn't align with our expectations. Faith enables us to relinquish control and trust that God will bring about the best possible outcome, even if it doesn't look exactly the way we envisioned. In surrendering to God's will, we allow Him to work freely in our lives, unhindered by our own agenda. Faith also brings about patience. Restoration takes time, and it is during this time that we must cultivate patience. Faith teaches us that we cannot rush God's process. Every moment of waiting is an opportunity for our faith to be strengthened. As we wait, our patience grows, and so does our understanding of God's faithfulness. There may be times when it seems like nothing is happening, but faith assures us that God is still working. It's important to understand that God's timing is always perfect. He doesn't rush the process of restoration because He is more concerned with our growth and readiness than our immediate comfort. It is through the waiting that we often learn the most valuable lessons about trust, perseverance, and dependence on God. Patience, fueled by faith, helps us endure the periods of uncertainty without growing weary or giving up. Faith is not just about believing in the outcome, but also about believing in the process. Often people want to skip over the hard parts, the moments of struggle, loss, or difficulty, and jump straight into the blessings of restoration. However, faith enables us to see that the process of restoration is just as important as the outcome. It is in the process that God refines our character, builds our strength, and teaches us to rely on Him more fully. Without the process, we would not be prepared for the restoration that is coming. Through faith, we learn to embrace the process, trusting that every moment of difficulty is serving a greater purpose in God's plan for our lives. The restoration process may involve pain, stretching, and transformation, but faith assures us that it is all part of the divine work that God is doing within us. Faith also plays a crucial role in our ability to overcome doubt and fear. When we are in a season of waiting, doubt often creeps in, making us question if God is truly working or if restoration is even possible. Faith is the antidote to doubt, reminding us that God's promises are sure and that He is faithful to fulfill His word. The enemy often tries to sow seeds of fear and uncertainty in our hearts during times of waiting, but faith acts as a shield, protecting us from these lies. It helps us stand firm in the assurance that God will restore what was lost, even when the evidence around us may suggest otherwise. Faith enables us to push past fear and doubt, choosing to believe in God's goodness and His ability to bring about restoration, even when the situation appears impossible. Faith has a powerful way of transforming our perspective. When we choose to trust in God's restoration, we begin to see things through the lens of faith rather than through the limitations of our natural circumstances. This shift in perspective enables us to see opportunities where others see obstacles, to experience peace where there is chaos, and to hold on to hope where there is despair. Faith allows us to see the potential for restoration even in the midst of brokenness. When we place our faith in God, we are able to tap into a perspective that sees beyond our immediate reality and into the greater work that God is doing in our lives. This transformed perspective allows us to walk through the process of restoration with confidence, knowing that God is faithful to fulfill His promises. Faith also fuels gratitude during the waiting period. Even when restoration has not yet fully manifested, faith helps us to be grateful for the work God is doing in our lives. We may not yet see the full picture, but faith enables us to thank God for His ongoing work, His presence, and His promises. Gratitude strengthens our faith and shifts our focus from what is lacking to what God is already doing. It keeps our hearts aligned with God's purpose for our restoration and reminds us that He is always working for our good. Through faith, we can give thanks even in the waiting, knowing that God's restoration is already in motion. Faith is the driving force behind the restoration process. It strengthens us, gives us patience, helps us overcome doubt, and changes our perspective. Faith in God's timing, plan, and purpose is essential for experiencing true restoration. It enables us to trust in His process, surrender our control, and embrace His will, knowing that He will fulfill His promises in the perfect time. God's restoration is not simply about returning what was lost, it is about refining us through the challenges we face. This process of refinement is essential because it shapes our character, molds our hearts, and prepares us for the greater things God has in store for us. When we go through hardships, we are often focused on the immediate pain or loss, but God's restoration is about much more than restoring our material circumstances. It is about developing us into the individuals we were meant to be, aligning us more closely with His purpose for our lives. Through adversity, God is able to shape us into people who reflect His image more fully, equipping us for greater influence and responsibility in His kingdom. The refining process can be uncomfortable, as it requires us to face parts of ourselves that we may have ignored or tried to avoid. The Bible likens God to a refiner who purifies gold and silver, removing impurities to make the metal stronger and more valuable. Similarly, God uses life's challenges to remove the imperfections in our character, exposing areas where we need growth or healing. While this process may be painful at times, it is necessary for our spiritual growth. Without it, we might remain stagnant, unaware of the deeper work that God wants to do in us. His purpose is to refine our hearts, making them pure and focused on Him, so we can carry His blessings and fulfill His purpose in the world. One of the most crucial aspects of the refining process is the development of patience. It is easy to desire immediate results, especially when we are going through hardship or loss. We want to see restoration happen quickly, but God's timing is different from our own. The refining process often takes longer than we expect, and this requires us to trust God's timing. Patience is not just about waiting, it's about learning to endure with a positive attitude, knowing that God is in control. Patience develops as we lean on God's promises, trusting that He knows what is best for us. As we wait, God strengthens our faith and deepens our dependence on Him, teaching us to rely on His wisdom rather than our own understanding. Through this patience, we learn to appreciate the fullness of the restoration process and understand that God is not just restoring external things, but also transforming us on the inside. Another important element of God's refining work is the development of resilience. Life's challenges often cause people to feel defeated or discouraged. However, God's refining work in our lives builds resilience, helping us to bounce back from difficulties and remain steadfast in our faith. Resilience is the ability to stand firm despite opposition or hardship. God strengthens us through trials, teaching us how to endure and grow stronger in the face of adversity. Rather than allowing challenges to define us negatively, resilience enables us to view them as opportunities for growth. Each trial we face is an opportunity to learn more about God's faithfulness and to see how His strength is made perfect in our weakness. Through resilience, we come to realize that we can overcome anything, not by our own power, but by God's grace and strength. It is in this place of resilience that God is able to complete His work of restoration. God's refining process helps us to cultivate a deeper sense of gratitude. When we go through trials and challenges, it can be easy to become consumed by what we've lost or the difficulties we are facing. However, the refining process helps us to shift our perspective and see the bigger picture. Through trials, we begin to appreciate the blessings we have and recognize the growth that is taking place within us. Even in the midst of hardship, we can find reasons to be thankful. This gratitude is a powerful aspect of restoration because it aligns our hearts with God's purpose and helps us to trust in His goodness, even when things aren't going according to our plans. As we go through the refining process, we learn to count our blessings and understand that God's restoration is not just about material things, but also about spiritual and emotional growth. The refining process also teaches us humility. In times of loss or struggle, we are often humbled by our inability to control the situation. It is easy to become self-reliant or prideful when things are going well. But when we face challenges, we are reminded of our dependence on God. Humility is a key characteristic that God seeks to develop in us through the process of restoration. As we are refined, we are stripped of our self-sufficiency and brought to a place of total reliance on God. This humility allows us to be more open to God's direction and correction. It also deepens our ability to serve others as we realize that we are not better than anyone else, but are all in need of God's grace and restoration. Humility allows us to approach others with compassion and understanding, recognizing that we all go through our own struggles and need God's help to overcome them. The refining process helps us to develop a deeper sense of purpose and clarity. When we experience hardship, it often causes us to reevaluate our lives and our priorities. The pain or loss we experience may force us to confront the question of why we are here and what we are meant to do. Through this process of questioning and reflection, God refines our sense of purpose, helping us to focus on what truly matters. Our ambitions, desires, and goals are often shaped by external influences, but when we go through trials, we are given the opportunity to realign ourselves with God's will. The refining process clarifies our purpose, enabling us to pursue the things that truly matter and to use our lives for His glory. This clarity of purpose is a key element of restoration because it empowers us to live with intentionality, knowing that we are fulfilling the unique role God has called us to. The refining process is an essential part of God's restoration work in our lives. It is through challenges and adversity that God purifies, strengthens, and molds us into the people He wants us to be. As we embrace this process, we learn patience, resilience, gratitude, humility, and clarity of purpose. These qualities not only help us endure difficult times, but also enable us to step into the fullness of God's restoration in our lives. Ultimately, the refining process is not just about restoring what was lost, but about transforming us into vessels that are ready to receive the greater blessings God has prepared for us. God's restoration is a process of rebuilding and renewing, and the ultimate goal is for us to experience wholeness in every aspect of our lives, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. It's important to understand that restoration is not just about returning to where we were before, but it is about moving forward into something better than we've ever experienced. God's purpose for restoration is not limited to fixing what has been broken or lost. It is about bringing us into alignment with His greater plan for our lives. This kind of restoration involves a deep, transformative process that touches every part of who we are. It challenges us to embrace change, accept healing, and trust that God is working all things together for our good, even when we can't yet see it. One of the key aspects of this transformation is the understanding that restoration often requires letting go of the past. Many people struggle with the notion of restoration because they are still attached to what they've lost. Whether it is a job, a relationship, health, or financial stability, the tendency is to focus on what was and what could have been. However, true restoration requires us to release the past, not because it is unimportant, but because holding on to it can prevent us from receiving what God has in store for us. God's desire is not for us to look back and dwell on the things that are no longer, but to move forward with hope and expectancy. Restoration is about growth and progression, and it can't happen if we are still holding on to things that are no longer part of God's plan for us. Letting go opens the door for God to bring something new and better into our lives, something that can bring deeper fulfillment and greater peace than we ever imagined. This process of letting go can be difficult, especially when we have emotional attachments to the things we've lost. Often the process of healing and restoration requires emotional work, acknowledging the pain, grieving the losses, and allowing ourselves to heal. Restoration doesn't mean that we won't feel the pain or disappointment of the past, but it does mean that we don't allow those feelings to control us. God understands our pain and He wants to walk with us through it, but we must make the choice to let go of the past so that we can embrace the future. Restoration involves emotional healing, and this can take time. It's important to allow ourselves the space to process and heal, trusting that God is using even our pain to shape us for the better. The emotional work of restoration enables us to move forward without the baggage of bitterness, regret, or unforgiveness, allowing us to step into the future God has for us with a heart that is free and open to His will. Another key element of God's restoration is the rebuilding of trust. Often when we experience loss or hardship, our faith can be shaken. We may begin to question God's goodness or wonder if He has abandoned us. Restoring trust is a vital part of the process because without it, we will find it difficult to move forward in faith. Trust in God is essential for experiencing restoration because it is through our faith that we open ourselves up to His transformative work. It is easy to trust God when things are going well, but when we face difficulties, trust can be tested. The rebuilding of trust requires us to revisit our relationship with God and allow Him to prove Himself faithful in new ways. This involves seeking Him in prayer, spending time in His Word, and allowing the Holy Spirit to strengthen our hearts. As we experience God's faithfulness in small ways, our trust grows and we become more confident that He is in control of our circumstances. This trust is what allows us to fully embrace the process of restoration, knowing that God will complete the work He has begun in us. Restoration also involves a new mindset, particularly when it comes to our thoughts and perceptions. Often the challenges and struggles we face can cause us to develop limiting beliefs about ourselves and our future. We may begin to think that we are unworthy of restoration or that things will never get better. However, in God's economy, restoration is not about what we deserve, but about His grace and love. A transformed mindset is essential for receiving restoration because it enables us to see ourselves as God sees us, redeemed, whole, and worthy of His blessings. This change in perspective can be difficult, especially when we've been through seasons of hardship, but it is necessary for moving forward. God's restoration requires that we reject the negative, self-limiting thoughts that keep us stuck in a cycle of defeat and begin to embrace the truth of His promises. Through the renewing of our minds, we can begin to align our thoughts with God's Word and His vision for our lives, opening ourselves to His restorative power.